I never imagined pride could turn into shame in the space of a single sentence. I was sitting at the back of that lecture hall, trying not to draw attention to myself, tucked into a corner like some overgrown piece of furniture. My knees cracked as I folded into the seat, and I smiled quietly, watching her up there, my daughter, my only child, standing with a group of classmates before a projection screen. She looked polished, confident, every bit the young woman I'd worked all my life to raise. I even wore a collared shirt, the one I usually save for funerals, just to look like I fit into that environment. Just to make her proud. Because I was proud. I was so damn proud I could hardly sit still. But then I heard her voice. Low, careless, but sharp enough to cut straight through my ribcage. "She's pretty," one of her friends whispered. I'd been close enough to hear. The rows in that small classroom made everything feel more intimate. "That your dad?" another asked. My daughter's response came without hesitation, without even a glance my way. "Yeah," she said. And then with a scoff that sounded like contempt soaked in embarrassment, she added, "He didn't even go to college. I don't know why he wants everyone to know I'm his daughter." She laughed under her breath like it was some kind of inside joke, like I was a walking punchline. The air left my lungs before I even realized I'd been holding it. I didn't blink, didn't move, just sat there while my ears burned and my throat clenched like it wanted to swallow the truth before it reached my heart. But it was too late for that. I stayed until the end. That's the part that haunts me the most. I didn't storm out or call her name or make a scene. No, I clapped politely when the presentations were over, shook hands with a professor I didn't know, and even waved when she finally saw me and forced a quick smile. I gave her a thumbs up like a fool, like a proud dad who hadn't just been gutted by the same mouth he used to feed, the same mouth that once called him hero in crayon on construction paper. She came over and gave me a hug, light and perfunctory, like she was doing me a favor. I asked how she was doing, if she needed anything. She said she was fine. I lied and said I was too, but my hands were trembling the whole ride home. When I got back to my apartment, I sat in the truck for 15 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. The building lights buzzed above me, and the engine ticked softly as it cooled, but all I could hear was her voice. "He didn't even go to college." It rang in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop. I thought of all the nights I'd come home covered in drywall dust and sweat, of the years I worked 2 jobs so she wouldn't have to take out loans. I remembered when she wanted a new phone and I sold my coin collection to surprise her. I remembered telling people I couldn't take vacation because my baby girls got school, but none of that mattered anymore. Because somewhere along the line, my sacrifices turned into shame in her eyes. Somewhere, she started believing that a degree made someone a man, and I didn't measure up. I didn't eat dinner that night, didn't turn on the TV. I walked into my apartment, peeled off that stiff collared shirt, and stood in the shower until the water went cold. Then I dried off, sat on the edge of my bed, and wrote her a message. Not long, not angry, just clear. I told her I heard what she said at school. I told her I wasn't angry, I was disappointed. But more than that, I was done pretending. I told her if I embarrassed her so much, she was free to go find a father she could be proud of. One with a degree, one with soft hands, one who didn't claw his way through life just to hand it all over. I told her I was canceling her tuition payment, her rent, her phone, everything. I ended the message with, "Be well." Then I turned my phone face down and let the silence swallow me whole. I didn't sleep much. My chest felt like it had been hollowed out and filled with something heavy and foreign. Grief, maybe, or guilt. I tried to tell myself I was doing the right thing, drawing a line after years of being stepped over. But a father's heart doesn't work that way. It doesn't just shut off because it's been hurt. It keeps beating, keeps breaking, keeps hoping. That's the curse of it. At some point around 4 a.m., I started pacing. I kept replaying it. Her voice, her laugh, the way she didn't even hesitate. That wasn't a slip. That was what she really thought. She didn't flinch because she didn't think it was cruel. Just true. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat by the window. The sky was gray, the way it always gets before fall fully sets in. I didn't check my phone. I didn't want to know if she responded. I needed space. Needed to remember who I was before her words chipped away at the image I'd built of myself. A man who gave everything. A man who, though flawed, had always showed up. Always paid. Always listened. I hadn't been perfect, but I sure as hell hadn't been a failure. And yet, there I was, 58 years old, divorced, alone in a small apartment, no degree, no letters behind my name, and now no daughter who claimed me. I wondered if this was what it all added up to. If this was how legacy died, not in fire, but in whispers behind your back. That night, I heard my phone buzz. I didn't look right away, but when I did, the screen showed one word from her. Seriously? I stared at it, then locked the screen. My jaw clenched, not from anger, but from clarity. This was only the beginning. I didn't reply to that one-word message. Seriously? Like I'd just canceled a dinner plan instead of everything I'd ever given her. Like the life I built around her needs, paying her rent without complaint, covering her tuition, keeping her on my phone plan even when she turned 22, was nothing more than a service she subscribed to. I stared at that word for a while, watching it glow on my cracked screen. I thought about all the times I'd reached out first, when she wouldn't answer my calls for days and I'd still check in, just to say, hey, just making sure you're okay. When she forgot Father's Day 2 years in a row, and I told her not to worry about it, knowing damn well it stung. And still, I kept showing up, kept paying, kept being proud, quietly, in the background. But now I was finally finished pretending that love meant swallowing disrespect just to keep the peace. The next morning, I made it official. I logged into every account with her name tied to it. Tuition payment portal, canceled. Her apartment lease, I emailed the landlord to say I was no longer financially responsible. Cell phone plan, dropped her line and changed the password. I didn't do it in a rage. I did it slowly, methodically, like a man patching the holes in a sinking ship. It wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries. Real ones. Ones I should have drawn years ago, but was too afraid to because I thought being a good father meant being endlessly available. I was wrong. Being a good father doesn't mean letting yourself be humiliated by the very child you bled for. It means loving them enough to teach them what respect looks like, by demonstrating it for yourself, even if it costs you everything. It didn't take long for the phone call to come in. It wasn't her, it was her mother. The woman I used to love, years ago, before bitterness replaced kindness and everything we said to each other started to sound like ammunition. What the hell did you do? She snapped, not even saying hello. I knew that tone well. I'd heard it for years, when I forgot to grab the right groceries, when I missed a school event because of work, when I didn't defend myself fast enough during an argument I never started. You cut her off, she barked. Her rent? Her tuition? Are you insane? I took a breath, long and steady, and said the words I'd been holding in for far too long. She's your daughter now? I said. You raised her to be ashamed of me. Now you can take care of her. There was a pause on the other end, just a beat, but I heard it. That flicker of truth she didn't want to acknowledge. She launched into a rant, full of accusations, telling me I was being vindictive, cold, that I was abandoning my responsibilities. I let her go on for a while, not because I agreed, but because I'd grown used to her voice filling silence like that. Finally, I interrupted. You wanted her to believe I was less than you. And now she does. You got what you wanted. So live with it. There was more yelling. Something about how I was always insecure about my lack of education, how I couldn't handle being outshined by my own daughter. I didn't even bother arguing. There's no reasoning with someone who turns every wound into a weapon. I just said, calmly, my decision is final. Then I hung up. I sat there for a while, my phone still in my hand, heart pounding but strangely light. It felt like I'd been holding something heavy for decades and had finally set it down. But the quiet after wasn't peaceful, not yet. It was hollow. I kept thinking about the little moments. Her first dance recital, where she froze on stage and I mouthed the steps from the audience until she smiled. The night she called me crying because her mom had yelled at her, and I stayed on the phone until she fell asleep. The way she used to cling to my hand when we crossed the street. All of that love didn't just disappear. It still lived somewhere inside me, rattling around like a ghost, refusing to be forgotten. And maybe that was the hardest part, knowing that even after everything, I still loved her. But I couldn't let that love keep making me small. Later that afternoon, I got a message from an old friend. One of those guys who knows just enough to know something's wrong. He sent me a screenshot. My daughter had posted something on Instagram. a selfie with some quote slapped over it. Some people only love you when they control you. Cut them off and watch how fast they fold. My name wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. The comments said enough. You're better off. Toxic parents are the worst. Proud of you for standing up for yourself. I stared at it, not out of shock, but sadness. She didn't just reject my support. She twisted the story to make herself the victim, made me into the villain. The narrative was clear. I was the controlling, bitter father who couldn't handle not being idolized. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. I didn't respond, didn't message her, didn't comment. Instead, I turned off my phone and walked outside. The air was crisp, early autumn. Leaves starting to fall, wind catching them just enough to make them dance on the pavement. I looked up at the sky and realized I hadn't really looked up in weeks, maybe months. I took a long walk around the neighborhood, past houses with kids playing in the yard, past a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and warmth, past a church I hadn't stepped inside in years. I thought about what it means to be a father, not just biologically, but emotionally, spiritually. The kind of man who gives without keeping score, but also knows when enough is enough. I had reached my enough. Not out of pride, out of survival. That night, I poured myself a glass of bourbon, not to celebrate, not to numb, just to mark the moment. A quiet toast to finally choosing myself. I sat on the back porch, watching the stars flicker into the sky, and whispered aloud, "You can have her." I wasn't talking to her mother anymore. I was talking to the world, to the version of her that didn't see me, didn't want me, didn't need me unless there was money attached. If that's who she's choosing to be right now, fine. Let the world have her. Let her mother have her. I'll mourn the daughter I raised, the one who used to love me for who I was. But I won't bankroll the one who spits on my name. The next morning, another message came in, this one longer. Wow. So you're really going to turn your back on your own daughter? After everything? Just because I said one stupid thing? I stared at it for a while and felt nothing. I used to tell myself that love didn't need recognition, that the hours, the money, the effort, the showing up, it all mattered, even if no one ever clapped for it. That maybe one day she'd look back and understand what it meant for a man like me to be in her corner. But I see now that there's a difference between being loved and being tolerated. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being her father and started being her background. The man who showed up when it was convenient. The man who paid for things, no questions asked. The man whose name she kept on her emergency contact list, but whose calls she rarely answered unless she needed something. That shift didn't happen overnight, but it happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice until it was too late. And when I finally saw it, I realized I hadn't lost her at that school presentation. I'd been losing her for years. After the divorce, I tried my best to keep things stable. I didn't fight her mother for full custody because I thought it was better not to drag her through courtrooms. I agreed to weekends, birthdays, holidays, whatever the lawyers said would cause the least disruption. I let her mom have the house, the new husband, the narrative. I kept my dignity and moved into a small rental with 2 bedrooms and thin walls. I made it feel like home, bought her a bed shaped like a race car when she was little, filled the fridge with her favorite snacks, and painted the walls a soft blue because she said it made her feel calm. But no matter how hard I tried, I could feel the distance growing. Little things, like how she'd say Dad when she needed something, but Mom when she talked about comfort. How her stories always started with, "My mom said," or "at Mom's house," and I'd nod, listening, even though I felt like a guest in my own child's life. The years marched on, and I kept being consistent. Pickup lines, parent-teacher meetings, soccer games, every damn recital where she forgot the steps but smiled when she saw me clapping anyway. I was there, even when I worked 12-hour days, even when I had to trade shifts or skip sleep. I'd bring her to my job sometimes, let her play with the tape measure or draw on scraps of wood. I'd tell her stories about how I used to fix things around my own childhood home. She'd laugh, ask if I could build her a treehouse someday, and I would promise her the world, because that's what fathers do. But somewhere after middle school, things shifted. She stopped asking, stopped laughing, started staying in her room, texting her mom between every sentence we shared. The calls became shorter, the visits quieter, and I just kept showing up, hoping love would be enough. I remember one afternoon when she was 17. She came over to pick up her phone charger. She was in and out in 5 minutes. No hug. No eye contact. Just, hey. And then, I gotta go. I asked if she wanted to stay for dinner. Said I'd make her favorite. She shrugged and said, Mom's already cooking. Then left. I stood there in the kitchen, frozen, holding the chicken I'd thawed out like an idiot who didn't get the memo that he'd become irrelevant. That night, I drank a little more than I should have and scrolled through old pictures. Her in pigtails. Her asleep on my chest. Her with frosting on her nose on her 3rd birthday. I remember wondering then, when exactly did she stop needing me? And why didn't I notice it happening until I was already on the outside looking in? People say you shouldn't blame the other parent. But sometimes, the truth isn't convenient. Her mother and I didn't just get divorced. We became opposing narratives. And she controlled the one that mattered. I never badmouthed her mom. Never tried to win our daughter over with money or guilt. But her mom? She played the long game. Subtle jabs. Quiet rewrites of history. Comments like, your dad doesn't understand college stuff. Or, well, you know how he is. Just enough to tilt the picture. And when I confronted her once, back when our daughter was about 15, she acted shocked, like I was paranoid. She's a teenager, she said. They all pull away. Maybe that was true. But mine didn't just pull away. She erased me. The other day, I was in the garage, clearing out old boxes. I found the birthday card I gave her when she turned 18. Inside it was a check and a note that said, for books, for bills, for anything you need. I'll always have your back. I remembered agonizing over what to write. Wanting to sound supportive, but not smothering. Wanting to show her that no matter how far she drifted, I'd always be her safe place. And I wondered, did she ever even read it? Or did she just cash the check and toss the card in a drawer? The money always disappeared fast. The gratitude? That vanished years ago. I thought maybe I was the only one who noticed. That maybe I was being sensitive or nostalgic. But then I got a message from my sister, Elaine. She's always been sharp. One of those women who sees through people like glass. She sent me a voice note. Hey, I saw Kayla's post, she said, her voice careful but firm. I'm not trying to meddle, but she's telling people you cut her off because she embarrassed you in front of her friends. That's not what happened, right? I didn't respond for a while. Just listened to it again. And again. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just pulling away anymore. She was rewriting the story. In her version, I'm the bitter, overbearing dad who couldn't take a joke. The insecure man who punished her over one comment. Not the man who sold his tools to cover her first car. Not the man who skipped meals some weeks just to afford her textbooks. Just a failure who lashed out. I sat there in the garage, gripping that old birthday card, my hands stained with dust and memory. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just feel hurt. I felt erased. There's a certain heaviness that settles into your bones when you spend your life trying to prove you're enough for people who've already decided you aren't. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in slowly, like rust under the paint, quiet, unnoticed until one day the whole thing crumbles. I used to think my lack of a degree was a scar I carried alone, something I tucked behind hard work and steady paychecks. But I've learned that other people don't see what you've survived. They only see what you lack. And once that label, less than, is attached to your name, it doesn't matter how loud your love is. They stop hearing it. I didn't skip college because I was lazy. I skipped it because my old man left when I was 17, and someone had to keep the lights on. My little brother was still in middle school, and my mom worked at a laundromat with a busted hip. I walked away from a scholarship because food mattered more than theory. I started working construction the day after graduation and didn't look back. Not because I didn't want more, but because survival has a way of narrowing your choices. Every paycheck went toward bills, groceries, school supplies for my siblings. I told myself I'd go back eventually, maybe take night classes. But life doesn't pause so you can catch up. 1 year became 5, 5 became a decade, and eventually, I became the man who almost went to college. The man who could build you a house, but never got a diploma to frame. I never expected applause for that. But I thought maybe, my daughter would understand the difference between failure and sacrifice. I thought love would teach her that a man's worth isn't measured by his resume. I never imagined the very thing I gave up would be the thing she used to cut me down. That my years of late-night jobs and missed meals would turn into a punchline in front of her friends. It made me think, how many times had she said that before? How many conversations had she had where she shrugged me off as just her blue-collar dad? Not the provider. Not the reason she had braces or a new laptop or tuition paid on time. Just the man who showed up in jeans and boots and didn't belong at the table. I've heard the whispers before. At school functions, at her summer internship events. People asking, "So what do you do?" in that polite tone that barely hides the judgment. And I'd answer honestly. I run my own contracting business, and they'd nod like they were impressed, but their eyes would scan my hands, the calluses, the dirt under the nails. I remember one of her professors once asking if I was the delivery guy. I laughed it off. So did she. But now I wonder, was she laughing because it was awkward? Or because it was true to her? After that message from my sister, I found myself scrolling through my daughter's social media, something I rarely did. I didn't like snooping, didn't like seeing a version of her life I wasn't invited to. But this time, I needed to know what she was saying. How she was painting me to the world. I found the post, the one where she called me controlling, where she wrote some long caption about toxic parents who don't want to see their kids grow past them. And right there in the comments, people who didn't even know me were validating her. You're better off without him. My dad's the same way. They just want to drag you down to their level. I sat there, rereading the words, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I wasn't angry, not in the way people think. I wasn't slamming fists or yelling at the ceiling. No, what I felt was worse. I felt unseen, like every sacrifice I'd made had been wiped clean, like I'd been erased and rewritten into someone else's story, a villain, a burden, a joke. And the worst part? She believed it. Not in a moment of anger, not in the heat of an argument, but in cold, calculated reflection. She meant every word. She wanted the world to know she was better than me, that she had outgrown the man who raised her, that she had risen above the very shoulders that lifted her. I went into my closet that night and pulled down a box I hadn't touched in years. It was full of old letters, drawings, report cards, all the little things she used to give me. A Father's Day card from when she was 10 that said, "You're my hero, even if you're always tired." A note she wrote during her first year of high school. "Thanks for helping me with math, even though you said you hated it in school." I held each one like it was a relic, like proof that I hadn't imagined her love. That once, long ago, she saw me, not as a failure, but as her father. I spent the next hour packing up the rest. Her baby books, photos, the stuffed bear I won for her at a carnival when she was 7. I put it all in a storage bin, sealed the lid, and slid it into the back of the closet. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed to stop bleeding from the same wound. I needed to accept that the little girl who wrote those notes was gone, and the woman she became didn't want what I had to offer, and maybe never would again. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Her name lit up the screen, this time a full paragraph. "You're making this so dramatic." I didn't mean it like that. I was just joking around. But now you've ruined everything. My rent's due in 2 weeks. I hope you're happy. I stared at the message and whispered to myself. I gave her everything, and I was still never enough. She said I was being dramatic, that I had ruined everything, that all this was just over a joke. I read her message 3 times, each pass-through slicing deeper than the last. It was the tone that did it, the entitlement, the revision, the refusal to take any responsibility. I could almost hear her voice in the words, rolling her eyes like she used to when she was a teenager, and I told her she couldn't stay out past 10. Back then, I chalked it up to growing pains. Now I saw it for what it really was. She believed love meant never being held accountable. That because I was her father, I would always cave, always pay, always swallow my hurt for the sake of the connection. But love isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of respect. And whatever this was between us now, it didn't feel like love anymore. It felt like manipulation, dressed up in guilt and expectation. I didn't respond right away. I put my phone down and walked outside, needing to breathe air that hadn't passed through pain first. The sun was just starting to dip behind the houses, casting long, orange streaks across the driveway. I stood there in my work boots, hands in my pockets, and tried to remember the last time we'd laughed together. Really laughed. Not polite smiles or hollow small talk. But real, honest laughter. I think it was 3 years ago. She came over for dinner, and I burned the chicken. We ended up eating cereal on the back porch and talking about movies until it got too cold to sit outside. That night, she kissed me on the cheek before she left. She said, "You're such a dork." And I remember feeling warm all over, like maybe I hadn't lost her yet. But now that memory felt like a lie. Or worse, a trick. Because if she could turn on me this fast, maybe she was never really with me to begin with. Maybe I was just a convenient option. A walking wallet with a familiar face. That weekend, I drove out to a small park about 30 minutes away. It used to be our spot. I'd take her there on Sundays when she was little, let her climb on the monkey bars while I read the paper. Sometimes we'd have sandwiches under the big oak tree in the back corner. She used to call it our tree. I sat on the same bench we always used and looked out at the empty swings. The whole place looked smaller now. Or maybe I was just older, heavier, not in body, but in spirit. I thought about what she said, about how I'd ruined everything. And I realized that in her world, love was a transaction. As long as I kept paying, I was worthy. As long as I didn't push back, I was safe. But the moment I pulled away, when I asked her to sit with the consequences of her own words, I became the villain. She thought love meant unlimited tolerance. She thought I was hers to use, and the second I stopped being useful, she called it betrayal. Later that evening, she showed up. No warning, no call ahead. Just a knock on the door around 7. I opened it, surprised, and for a moment, my heart leapt. She looked tired, maybe even a little remorseful. Her eyes were puffy, and she held her phone in her hand like it was a shield. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit down, just stood there in the middle of my living room like a guest who wasn't sure she wanted to stay. "I didn't mean what I said," she began. "It was just dumb. People talk. I was nervous, and I didn't think you'd hear it." I nodded slowly. "But you said it," I replied. "And you meant it." She winced. I was frustrated. Everyone else's parents have careers and degrees, and she stopped herself. "It's just complicated." That was the moment something in me finally settled. Not in anger, but in clarity. "You don't have to be proud of me," I said. "But you don't get to disrespect me either." She looked up, surprised. Maybe she thought I'd cave the second she showed up. Maybe she'd hoped a few tears would reset the board. But this wasn't a game anymore. "I paid your tuition," I continued. "Your rent. Your phone. I showed up when your mom didn't. I stayed up when you were sick. I held you when you cried. I worked when I was too damn tired to stand. And you stood in front of people and laughed like I was something to be ashamed of." She looked away, and I could see her lip tremble. But still, no apology. Just silence. I waited. Gave her the space to say something real. Instead, she said, "So what now? You're done being my dad." And there it was. The twist. The emotional bait. Because in her eyes, love meant unconditional service. If I stopped funding her life, I must be abandoning her. I took a deep breath. "I will always be your father," I said. "But from now on, I'm no longer your safety net. You made it clear who you think I am. Now you get to live with that." She shook her head, scoffing. "You're punishing me." I shook mine right back. "No," I said. "I'm respecting myself." She didn't stay long after that. Grabbed her purse and walked out the door without looking back. And I let her go. I didn't call her name. Didn't ask her to come back. I stood at the window and watched her walk to her car, the porch light casting long shadows behind her. For a moment, I felt something twist in my chest. Regret, maybe. Fear. But it passed. I knew this was the only way. If I caved now, she'd never learn. She'd keep believing that love is a thing you can drain, tap into, and refill only when it benefits you. I had to show her it wasn't. That love without respect is just dependence with a nicer name. That night, I sat at the table alone, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. My phone lit up once more. "I hope you know I'll never forgive you for this." I looked at the message, then turned off the phone. Not out of anger, but peace. Because maybe, for the first time in my life, I was finally choosing it. I didn't check my phone the next morning. I didn't need to. I already knew what would be waiting there. More accusations, maybe silence, or worse, another casual attempt to rewrite the truth. And I was done rereading her indifference like scripture, looking for signs of remorse. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, and stood out on the porch as the sun rose over the quiet street. The neighborhood was just starting to stir. A few joggers passed, someone walked their dog, and the world turned like it always had, unaffected by the storm in my life. I thought about what she said before she left. "I'll never forgive you for this." The old me would have begged for that forgiveness. I would have twisted myself into whatever shape she needed to feel loved again. But this new part of me, the one that finally stopped bleeding to make others comfortable, knew better. Knew that peace is rarely quiet at first. Sometimes it comes with grief. With grief, and then with freedom. I spent that day doing small things. Reorganizing the garage. Fixing a loose cabinet door in the kitchen. Cleaning out the trunk of my truck. It wasn't about distraction. It was about reclamation. Taking back the spaces in my life that had been on pause while I poured every ounce of energy into someone who didn't value it. There's something sacred about simple labor. About using your hands, your back, your breath to restore what's fallen apart. I didn't play music. Didn't turn on the TV. Just listened to the rhythm of nails against wood, of screwdrivers finding their groove. And in that silence, I thought about the man I used to be. A man who thought love was best proved through endurance. Who wore his sacrifices like armor and kept waiting for the applause that never came. I realized I had been auditioning for fatherhood long after I had already earned the role. Around midday, I found myself staring at an old photo on the fridge. It was crooked. One of those school pictures where they make kids sit in front of a cloudy blue background and smile like they mean it. She was maybe 11 in that one. Her smile still had baby teeth. Her eyes hadn't yet learned to narrow in judgment. She'd given me that photo in a paper frame she decorated herself. It had glitter and peeling stickers and the words, "Best Dad Ever." I stood there, hand resting on the handle of the fridge, and I felt something shift. Not bitterness, not sadness exactly. Just a quiet knowing that the girl in that photo wasn't the same as the woman who walked out of my door. And that was okay. People change. But love doesn't mean tolerating who someone becomes when they no longer respect who you are. Later that afternoon, I drove to the post office. I had one thing left to send her. I put together a small envelope with copies of her student loan information, a list of grants and scholarship sites, and a handwritten note. Short, not dramatic. Just a few lines. "You're smart. You're capable. And you don't need me to keep proving that. Take care of yourself. I believe in you, even if you don't believe in me." I didn't sign it Dad. Just my name. It wasn't spite. It was clarity. She wanted space. She wanted to choose someone else's version of who I was. So I let her. But I wasn't going to stop being decent. That part of me, she didn't get to erase. When I got back, I sat on the porch with a glass of water and watched the mailman stop at each house. It hit me then how long I'd been chasing people who were already walking away. My ex-wife, my daughter, even my own father, decades ago. I'd built my whole identity around being the one who stays, who fixes, who holds on. And maybe that's why letting go felt so unnatural. Like a betrayal. But in truth, I wasn't betraying anyone. I was just finally choosing not to betray myself. That night, I lit a fire in the small pit I'd built out back. Threw in some old receipts, a few things that didn't need to be kept anymore. Among them was the auto-pay printout for her tuition. I watched the flames curl around it, turning ink to ash. It wasn't celebration. It was closure. Around 10, my phone buzzed again. Just a missed call this time. No message. No voicemail. I didn't call back. Not because I was angry, but because I knew what I'd hear. More guilt. Maybe some panic now that the bills were real. Maybe even a softer voice. One that pretended none of this ever happened. But I wasn't interested in erasing the past. I wasn't rewriting anything. I was accepting it. She called me a failure. And I let her go. Not out of pettiness. Out of truth. Because I would rather be a failure in her eyes than a doormat in my own. Before I went to bed, I took one last look around the house. The silence didn't hurt anymore. It held me like a familiar friend. I climbed into bed, pulled the blanket up to my chest, and exhaled like I hadn't in weeks. The kind of breath you only get after surviving something quiet and cruel. I thought about the years ahead. Holidays where her chair might be empty. Phone calls that might never come. Grandkids I might not get to meet. And I let that grief settle. Not to wallow, but to respect it. Because letting go of someone you love, truly love, is a death of sorts. But it's also a rebirth. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving her. I walked away because I finally started loving myself. She chose pride over relationship, and I chose peace over resentment. That doesn't make me heartless. It makes me healed. If you've ever had to choose between your self-respect and someone you love, then you know the heartbreak isn't in the walking away. It's in the fact that you had to walk away at all. But sometimes peace demands a sacrifice. And sometimes, the only way to be seen is to stop letting yourself be invisible. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below, like the video, share it with someone who needs strength to set boundaries, and subscribe for more stories that speak truth to family, betrayal, and healing. Your voice matters here. See you soon in the next one.